It's pretty awesome.
Can you imagine if you had to come to work every day and this is where you came?
That'd be a cool work job.
Wouldn't this be a really cool job?
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and walk down just a little way so everybody can come inside. Let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing. So as you heard, well, let me do one thing first. As you know, there was an introduction made. My name is Dave Brown, and I've been working at Space Center Houston for 25 years. And I've had the privilege of giving this tour to the general public for my first 7 years working for Space Center Houston. But you know what? In that time, a lot of things have changed, especially right here. Because if you notice, we have mock-ups of the International Space Station. This is where the astronauts actually train before they ever go up to the International Space Station in space. It gives them the closest proximity to what they're going to see when they arrive. So who would like to go inside the International Space Station?
Let's do it.
Yeah, we all would like to. And if I had it my way, we would be down there right now, walking through and seeing what it is up close. But we don't want to interrupt the astronauts when they're training. In fact, we may see astronauts while they're training as we walk down this catwalk. And that would be really cool. So what you're looking at, as I said, are full-scale mock-ups. The reason why they're full-scale is we want the astronauts to be able to get a better understanding of what they're about to see when they get up to the International Space Station and what they're going to be working with. As we come down a little bit farther, what I want you to notice is on the International Space Station mock-ups, you'll notice there's a lot of country and flags representing the countries that these are their modules that they will have while up in the International Space Station. As Stephanie mentioned, we have partners that are working with us on the ISS, Russia being one of the biggest contributing partners. But you have other countries that represent as well. In fact, what if I told you that Canada has one of the biggest parts of the International Space Station, yet if you looked at it from the size, it's not really that big. And that's the robotic arm. But that robotic arm is so important to us, it helped us take modules out of the space shuttle to put into space, and then the astronauts did the hard work. They had to connect the modules together. It was kind of like putting together a set of Legos. Only the difference is, instead of just pushing them together, they had to do all the actual work of attaching them with wires, clamps, couplers, things to that effect. As you walk a little further down, let's go ahead and walk down this way. We start looking at things that are important. How do we go out into space? Well, you have to have an airlock. So if you look right here where it says Quest, you have an airlock. This is the piece that's connected to the International Space Station modules that allow the astronauts to get inside, get into their spacesuits, and then leave from the International Space Station to the vastness of space. Now that seems pretty easy. You would think, well, let's just open up a door and we'll go right into space. Do you think that would work?
No.
Probably not. And that's because one of the things that we don't realize until you do more research is that space is a vacuum. Completely different than what we would have inside the International Space Station. So we have to make sure that the pressure is the same on the inside as it is on the outside, so that when we open the door, we don't get sucked out, or when we try to get back in, sucked in. So those have to be equal. So it takes a little bit of time. Now let me ask you this question. How long did it take you to get dressed? Maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes?
Minute.
About a minute. That would be me. It would be, wham, bam, thank you, and I'm dressed. Well, what if I told you it takes the astronauts well over an hour to get dressed just to do a spacewalk? Now, do you think it would be easy to do that process of getting dressed when you're floating? Can you imagine trying to put on a shirt or put on a pair of pants while you're floating? Well, what happens if you're putting your pants on and you hit your foot? What do you think is going to happen to you when you're floating? Hard to believe. When we do it, it's not a problem because gravity helps us. We just hit our foot. Oh, well, that's okay. I'm going to make sure it gets on my leg. An astronaut hits their foot and they're going to start to spin. because they're floating. So the process is a little bit harder. So when they get dressed, they actually have to have two astronauts working together. Think of it like swimming. If you ever think about swimming in this, always have a buddy with you. The astronauts feel the same way. They always have a buddy. Let's walk a little bit farther down. Oh, that's fine. We'll take a little time. So I want to point something out to you. We always talk about the International Space Station, but really if you want to get an understanding of what it looks like when it's assembled and floating and orbiting around our Earth, look on the very back wall over there and you can see a model of what the International Space Station looks like. That's what it would look like if it was in space. Now while it's in space, one of the things that's really interesting are those two blue pieces on there. Does anybody know what those are?
Stabilizers.
You're close, because they do stabilize. In fact, they have to be orientated in an area so they do keep stabilized, so the station will always stay in an orbit and not spin while in Earth. But that's our power source. Those are photovoltaic rays. That's what pulls the sun's energy in and allows us to power up the International Space Station. So one of the things that's interesting, as the station is orbiting around the Earth, these arrays are tilted to get as much of the sunlight as they can as it's orbiting around the Earth. Now, does that mean that we have the sun always out there for us to see as we're orbiting around the Earth? Think about yourself. We have a daylight and we have a nighttime. Well, there are going to be times when the station passes around where the Earth is blocking the sun. So we're not getting as much light. We're trying to get as much of that sunlight as we can so that we can keep the station powered. Now, we do have batteries that absorb a lot of this energy and store it so that we do have power while we're in the darkness or nighttime of space.
Have they ever run out of power while they're up there?
As of right now, no. Now, here's the problem we have. When we do have problems, we could have things that shut power or we have to shut power down. That will be a time when there is a limited amount of power, but it is stored in batteries so that it is there for use. Hopefully we'll never have that problem where we do run out of power, because without power, the International Space Station would be flying blind.
Yeah.
And that's not a thing that you want to have, especially when you're traveling at the speed that it's traveling around the Earth. So who wants to be an astronaut? Anybody like to be an astronaut? How cool would it be to be an astronaut? I would love to be an astronaut. I don't think I meet the requirements health-wise. I'm a little big, but it would be a cool thing to be. So as astronauts, which we are, I've already nominated you all as astronauts. So you're astronauts for a day. How's that? Well, let's come down and look at our astronaut playground. So now a question I have for you is, when astronauts train, do you think they'd be in this really fancy looking office building with all these really nice places to get drinks and have a chair that relaxes back?
No.
No. You know what they sit in? Look directly below you. This is their office. Just a regular old chair with a nice folding table. And they come in here and this is where they go to work. Now they'll have engineers that will work with them that are experts at the materials that they'll be using in space. So those engineers are actually teaching the astronauts to be like them, experts. Because when they go into space, everything they do is calculated at 100%. It has to be done correctly. There is no, well, we can get 90% of it done and we should be okay. They don't think that way. It's 100%. In fact, they train so long that they may train 6 to as many as a year and a half before they go into space, just to make sure they get everything done correctly and they understand everything.
I'm seeing right now the EV1 bag right there on that one table. So EV1 would be, usually there's like astronauts go in pairs, like you said. So one of, that would be EV1, extravehicular 1, and then EV2 would be the other person. So say my friend Reese here is EV1 and his brother Quentin is EV2 or whatever. And then I'm not exactly sure what all is in that big bag, but I can see that they've got a manual down there. They have that bag there. It looks like it might be
Cooling garment.
there's a cooling garment.
There is cooling.
Yep. So, you know what then? That's the underside of there. I'm so glad you have better eyes than I do. Thank you. I'm like squinting. So the first thing they put on underneath, well, the very first thing they put on, remember I said they don't get to go to the bathroom when they're in their spacesuit? First thing they put on is something called a maximum absorbency garment. It's a big old fluffy diaper because they'll be in that suit for 6 to 8 hours. So then the next thing they put on is a cooling garment that can help them keep cool or warm them up. Because as they're going around the sun, I know Dave was saying,